Hi there, and welcome to this week's Nasty Nelson podcast, brought to you by Pickleball News Asia. And this week we are asking the question, has the Malaysia pickleball bubble burst? We're going to check into whether it's kind of reached a crescendo. But before we do that, if you like what we do and would like to help us spread the word a little further, please do like this video or subscribe to the channel. It helps and we appreciate it hugely. So let's get back to this question. About has the bubble burst, the pickleball bubble burst in Malaysia? And we ask this because there's been a huge amount of excitement, and it was picked up all over the world. And I guess that was seen with the number of professionals and brands that were coming and making detours to get into Malaysia because they just heard that the scene was going absolutely crazy here. Which was true, the pickup of the sport has been nothing short of remarkable. But there seem to be signs that maybe this incredible bubble has popped or burst somewhat. What do I base that on? And I think the main thing that you would look at that seems to indicate that there could be a problem is court occupancy. So if we go back to when things really kicked off 2 years ago or so, the reality was that when you wanted to book a pickleball court, it was nearly impossible to do. So what was typical was that the courts released their new days about two weeks in advance. And so it was not an overstatement to say that many people were literally waiting up at night until midnight on the websites for the courts to open up and immediately try to book the courts. And if you were like 30 seconds late after midnight, you just couldn't get a court anywhere in, certainly within KL, but across Malaysia. It really was as crazy as that. Even more than that, there became a secondary market for pickleball courts for a period of time. So if you can get that, so what that would mean is almost like ticket touts, some people would get into groups and they would all hang around at midnight and they would block out as many courts as they could get. And then on some of the channels like Reclub or other places where people are looking for games, they would start selling the courts that they have booked for over the published prices. So people were actually making a markup on courts that they had booked because they knew that there was this shortage of courts. Then what we saw, in line with this incredible demand, was something pretty amazing that happened in Malaysia, which was the number of courts that started to get built. And I've lost count of the number, but I hear it's anything from 300 to 500 facilities across the country, purpose-built pickleball courts, and the standard of some of the facilities is just absolutely incredible. Even going back, say 3 or 4 months, with all these facilities being built, it seemed like occupancy was still very, very high. But there has been a trend where what you've seen is it's become easier and easier to book courts, which means that the occupancy seems to be going down and the utilization of courts seems to be going down. In addition to that, what we're finding is that a few other things are happening that indicate maybe things are not as rosy as it seems. So one is that some courts are now going out of business, and we've seen a few of those that have been announced on social. Sad to see them go. But at the moment, what we see with the courts that are going out of business is that there seems to be somewhat of a trend to why certain courts are going out of business. Obviously, I can't account for people's cash flows, how deep their pockets are to last through a bad time. But if I take that away and I just look at some of the more on the surface details, location seems to be an issue. So those courts that were not in the best locations, when there was less courts available, people would still go to them. But now there are so many choices in so many locations. If you're in a remote or not a nice location, then people are just not going to play in your court. So I think that has it was a problem for some courts. The other thing was, in the rush to get so many courts built, there are definitely a wide variance in the standard of facilities. And I'm not just talking about the ones that have the really nice kind of social atmosphere, food and beverage, toilets and showers. I'm actually talking about the actual space allocated to the courts as well. So there were courts that were built because people just wanted to get in quick to get on that bandwagon, to get on this bubble that was growing. But the courts were substandard, not enough space around the edges, far too close to each other. I've seen some of the designs were like just really, really crazy, where people spent money but didn't spend a few minutes just to think about the design and layout of the court. Sometimes it could be out of greed, where they try to cram more courts into a space than they should have put, rather than put the space around them. So where playing capacity is compromised, some of those courts I've seen have also run into problems, and some of them have closed down. But just recently, in the run-up to Christmas, New Year, and since New Year, definitely we've seen this underutilization of courts really seem to manifest even more. What I've seen is, if I take this weekend as an example, typically, even when the courts were multiplying up, even though court time became available at what I would call off-peak times, during the week, early in the morning, those kind of times, what we did find was it was still typically quite difficult to book a court in what you would call peak hours. So that would be from about 6 p.m. onwards, especially at weekends. So if you weren't booking somewhere in advance, it was still pretty tough to get a court during those peak hours, almost anywhere actually. But just in the last 6 to 8 weeks, that also doesn't seem to be the case anymore. So, as an example, just my own experience this weekend, I went to 2 different courts during peak hours at weekend, and more than half the courts were empty, which is something I literally never seen even 3 or 4 months ago. In addition, if you go into some of the court booking applications like Courtsite, and you now look at peak times for the next day or the weekend, those were always, again, pretty much booked out. But now, if you go and look, you can find that there are usually many courts available. And this is even in some of the most popular courts. So in Malaysia, one of the original courts was Pickleball Social Club, still very, very popular, still probably one of the most successful ones. But for the first few years of their operation, I mean, literally, it was so difficult to get a court any time, day or night. Whenever you went in, it was always booked up. Actually, their bookings are still quite strong, to be honest. But if you look, there are usually, in the few days ahead, courts available, particularly in their outside courts. So to me, I think that particular court is still doing very well, but compared to how it was, there's definitely a drop, and there is more availability more easily in those courts. And then just another signal that maybe things that bubble is really being pierced a little bit, is if you take even some of the premium courts, so one of the possibly the nicest court in Klang Valley area would be the Thomas court. Certainly it would argue for that position. Excellent courts, great space, lots of facilities, amazing showering facilities and things like that. But they have also typically slashed their costs, their court cost, beyond their original published prices. Now, in doing that, they've been fairly successful in keeping the courts busy, but it's interesting that even this most premium facility, in order to keep the utilization up, has had to make some drastic special offers on pricing to get people in. And I look at other courts that maybe are not as premium as Thomas, who don't seem to be prepared to cut these deals and do these special offers. And again, if I look on Courtsite, it's quite barren. Their bookings are really quite barren, and we'll show some examples of that in Courtsite on the background here, so you can see some of those courts that are really open. So does this mean that the bubble has actually really burst, and that people are walking away from the sport and it's falling apart? I don't think so. I think what we're seeing here is a tuning or an adjustment to reflect the reality of how the sport is progressing. So, first of all, I think the sport is still increasing. Difficult to know that for sure, but one of the ways I look at it is I look at some of the platforms where people communicate in order to play. So if I take Reclub, which is in Malaysia, still the biggest social platform for organising games, I took a look at the 5 largest clubs in Reclub, where people join up to post their games and then get people to join the games that are going on. And so, give you an idea, the largest club, Malaysia club in Reclub, is called RCN. Back in August last year, they had about 15,000 members. They're now up to just under 19,000 members. Next largest one was Klang Valley. And the Klang Valley Club back in August had about 12,500 members. Now they've got about 14,500 members. If I then drop down to the next ones, the rises are not quite so big, but there's Pickle Social Malaysia. They had about 7,000 members. They're just under 8,000 members now. Double J, not much increase actually. They've only gone up about 200 in the space of about 6 months. And the next one down was called the Pickle Bunny. And also they've only had about another 500 members join in that space from August till now. So the rate of players that are new players signing up and joining platforms like Reclub so that they can play, is slowing down. Definitely slowing down, but it's not reducing, and it's not static. There are more players coming in. So I think the amount of play and the amount of players is still going to continue to grow. But I think what's actually happening here right now is there's probably just there's been a tipping point where, in order to service this massive demand, there was just massive demand for players. There was just a big surge of entrepreneurs coming into the market and building these courts and facilities so quickly, which was an amazing thing to happen. But I think what's happened is there's just hit that tipping point now where there's just probably too many facilities for the number of players that we have. So we've probably hit the point now where this vast increase in courts coming up is probably just due to market forces, just going to come to an end. And now the increasing capacity of courts, I think, will probably stop for a while. I do believe that players will continue to join the game, but what it will now be is a much more steady increase. So I think that there'll be some consolidation. Maybe a few more courts might suffer and fall by the wayside, which will be sad. But generally speaking, I think the number of courts will probably stay where it is now. And it will take a little bit of time before utilization rates go to such a level again that there's a need from the market for more courts. So I think what we're seeing is just this rationalization of the market. The entrepreneurial bent in Malaysia meant that very quickly we serviced this huge demand that was growing. Probably it's been over-serviced, hence we're seeing some softness in bookings, empty courts, but I think it's rationalizing. No doubt a few casualties will occur, but overall I think the capacity will start to get filled as this slower, more steady increase of players comes in. So if we come back to the overall question, has the bubble burst in Malaysia? I would say that maybe a small pop, a small correction. I don't think the pickleball bubble, in terms of interest in the game, more people coming in, continued tournaments, I don't think that's going to stop, and I don't think it's going to get less, but it is decelerating, and I think it will now be on a much slower, more even path, and there will be some casualties, certainly in the court space, as there does seem to be a little bit of oversupply. So I think where we're at in terms of the question is the absolute craziness, I believe, is over. And we're now into a situation where the sport is going to grow far more organically, but it's still going to grow strongly, and it's still going to consistently go up because it's just such a compelling, addictive sport. So with that, that's my take on whether that bubble has burst. Interested in your views, so if you've got thoughts on it, please do put them in the comments below. And if you like what we're doing, please do, as I asked at the start, subscribe to the channel or like this video. It helps us so much. But with that, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you again next week.